John, you're the drummer of System of a Down. He goes, yeah. I go, what are you, an asshole? You never told me?
But the comics were something that in a large way made as big of a difference in my life as drumming did.
I'm your host, Vincent Zorzolo, and I'm here with John Dolmayan, the owner of Torpedo Comics and also the drummer for System of a Down. Hey, John, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
It's been a really fun interview, man. I hope we do this again.
And again and again. So let's talk a little bit about how long we know each other, so people get a perspective of your how long you've been involved in the comic book world. I met John at the Wondercon in 1995. It was one of the first Wondercons I ever did, and John had this big setup with like all this wire racks that created this kind of like little cage and filled with comic books everywhere. It was like wall to wall, ceiling to floor comic books, and that's when we started wheeling and dealing together. I'd look at a bunch of books, I'd pull a bunch of books off the wall. John would come up with a great price, we'd do a deal, and WonderCon was, I think, part of the beginning for both of us with conventions, and well, at least for me in California.
So we're talking before CGC. We're talking,
yep,
where it was kind of the Wild West. Everybody had their own grading, and of course, everybody gave themselves a little bit of a edge on their grading. If it was a 7.0, maybe it was an 8.0, It's like an 8.0. It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. And, back then I remember flying out to WonderCon, and sometimes I'd break even, and, sometimes I'd lose money doing shows because it was traveling all the way across country. There was a lot of expense involved. And I'm sure you've experienced that flying from the West Coast to the East Coast for conventions. It gets really expensive.
It's very difficult when you have to factor in staff, flights, hotels, the convention costs, and if you don't get hit, food. Well, I don't feed my employees, so it's not really big. But my bills are enormous.
Yeah.
And then you factor in, if you get hit with drayage, you have no chance.
Right.
And for those of you who don't know, there's a cute little trick that Freeman and GES use called drayage. It's a process by which they charge you per pound. So in other words, it might cost you, if I used to semi my entire 8 or 10 booth setup to New York Comic Con, and it would cost me $8,000 round trip. This is back in the day. And then Freeman would want to charge me another $25,000 to take it from the dock to my booth. And they just did it by the pound. And you don't really have a whole lot of options. They make it very difficult for you if you're bringing in anything outside of a small van.
Yeah.
But I will say, on the flip side of it, they are very helpful if you're just kind of wheeling stuff in. But, their objective is to make a lot of money. I just don't see how they get away with it. It seems like
every city has their own, or every convention center has their own set of rules. But, when I think back to those early days, you and I were hustling and sometimes losing money, sometimes breaking even. And we both fought through that. And we've come out the other side and doing pretty well in the comic book world. We knew each other before you joined the band. I'd love to get a little backstory for people. John is the drummer for System of a Down, one of my favorite new metal, heavy metal bands, and was really funny because I knew John before he was in the band, and then he never told me he was in the band. John's a really kind of humble guy. He's a comic guy, so we were comic guys, that's how we knew each other. But I was at a convention once. I was listening to my AirPod and iPod, actually, I think it was back then. And I'm listening to System of a Down, and I'm rocking out, walking to the convention. And a buddy of mine asked me, he said, what are you listening to? And I'm like, well, listen to System of a Down. These guys are awesome. And he goes, John's the drummer. I'm like, what are you talking about? John's the drummer. He would have told me John's the drummer. So he says, no, John's the drummer. So I walk up to your booth, and I walk up to you, and I go, John, you're the drummer of System of a Down? He goes, yeah. I go, what are you, an asshole? You never told me? And we both started laughing, and but it is what it is. And I think that's a testament again to, you weren't walking around going, hey, I'm the drummer of System of a Down. You were at the comic book convention as part of our community. We were all part of this community together. And then over the years, I've seen a lot of bands live up until I met you. Probably the most I've seen, probably like Metallica 7 or 8 times. And I think I've seen you guys probably close to 10, 12 times now. And you guys put on a fantastic show. But I want to get into the early days. How did you get into the band? How did that all come together?
Well, I guess first we should talk about how I got into comics, right? Like
I love that too. That's great.
Yeah. And then we'll just go through the path, kind of the life story, a quick synopsis. Overview, whatever you want to call it. So I was born in Beirut, Lebanon. I am of Armenian descent. I think most people that are watching this interview are going to know some of this stuff, but I'll reiterate it for those that don't. During the civil war in Lebanon in the early 70s, we had to leave because it was very dangerous. And we ended up in Canada. It's very cold in Canada, as you know. And our Armenian blood just didn't like it very much, so we moved to California. And around 12 years old, now up to this point that we came to California, for every Christmas and every birthday, I asked for a drum set. I love drums. From the age of 3, I wanted to play drums, and I would mimic drums. And I come from a musical family, and that my dad was also a musician, still is. So I did not get a drum set because we lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in North Hollywood, California, and there was nowhere to put a drum set, nor did my parents really want me playing music. It's a difficult way to make a living, and there are a lot of negatives associated with it that I really just never got into, but they still exist. And of course, in hindsight, my family is very happy that I chose music because it fulfilled a dream of mine, and it also provided me with the means to do a lot of other things, a lot of good things, a lot of fun things. Right around the age of 12, a friend of mine introduced me to a comic book store. I had no idea that they existed previous to that time. He took me to the store, and I would say my drumming was my nature. Before I knew what it was, I wanted to play drums. Before I could probably even talk, I was mimicking a drummer to some extent. But the comics were something that, in a large way, made as big of a difference in my life as drumming did. Not just because I made a living with it and it helped pay the bills before System was signed, but because it took my imagination to a different place. One of the reasons I love comic books so much is because it's so fantastic and there's so many possibilities. And also because of the altruistic nature of the heroes. They're doing things, for example, Spider-Man is dirt poor. For most of the time that I read Spider-Man, he was a high school student. He had lost his family and was being raised by his aunt. And it was compelling and sad and real. And he had no reason to put his life in danger and help others outside of the fact that there was something in him that compelled him to do that. And also because he made a very tragic mistake early on in his life, and he kind of spent the rest of his life making up for that mistake. Well, that's incredibly compelling and interesting. And, I went to this comic book store, and they had all these comic books in bags pinned to the wall. They had stacks of back issues. They had bins of 25-cent cheapy books. And that's, for my $5 budget, that's where I lived, right? It was those 25-cent books. And I went in and I spent my $5 on books the first time. And I took them home and read them and enjoyed them and reread them. And I couldn't wait to get back to that comic book store. So, throughout all those years where, I was able to get my allowance up a couple of bucks a year, went from 5 to 8 and then 13 for some reason. And then finally I was like, Dad, just give me $20. Let me go and buy some comic books with this money. And I would constantly ask for more money so I could buy more comic books, because you start reading the stories and you want to know what happens next. Like it's the old serials method, right? Like every single book is a cliffhanger. So, and then I started to read like stuff that had even more depth. Like the Vertigo series came out around the mid '90s or whatever it was, late '80s. Dark Knight came out. People were doing more serious work, and it was attracting more serious talent. So you had the Frank Millers of the world doing things. You had the Alan Moores and everybody else. Not discounting all the wonderful superhero artists and writers. They were fantastic, and I gravitated to all of it. So, during this period of time, I finally convinced my parents to buy me a drum set for my 15th birthday. My constant nagging and begging bared fruit, and I was gifted with this drum set. It was actually my father's drummer that he played with in Lebanon. He sold us one of his kits. It was a Rogers kit. It was like a dark gray, and I did something which is kind of like will explain my personality to people. Vinny, you know me very well.
Yeah.
But for the people that don't, I went. We were still in an apartment, so I took my sticks, I put them down, and I went to every single neighbor in our apartment building, which was only about 6 neighbors, smaller apartment building. And I asked each of them, when is a convenient time for me to play drums? And I was 15 years old.
That's very nice.
Yeah. And I figured I didn't want to disturb them, but I wanted to play drums. I couldn't stay away from the drum set. And at this point, I think I had like 2 long boxes of comics that I would constantly reorganize, put in alphabetical. Then I would put it by storyline, and then I would put it by artist, and like all the things that we all did, right? Like, all us mentally ill people that collect comics. And I got permission from my neighbors, and they never complained once. And I tried to stay within the time frame of what I said I would play. And, subsequently after that, my parents were able to save up enough money to buy our first house. And I moved from the apartment building to the house, and my drums moved into the garage, which is where most people made their bones in the music world. But I also used it as an impromptu comic book store. Like right around that time, I was starting to feel like a loser for asking my parents for an allowance. So I got a job. At like 15 and a half years old. So I was able to pay for my own comic books, and I was able to buy drumsticks for $3 a pair and break them in one day, and other things that were necessary in drumming. I wasn't even thinking about girls at this time. I was so shy. It was just not even in my peer review. And I think I was still playing with Transformers too. So anyway, long story short, it got to the point where my comic book habit was too expensive to sustain with the small amount of work that I was doing, plus buy the drumsticks, take my friends and I would go to McDonald's or something, like all the stuff you do as a kid. So I said, okay, I'm going to have to start selling some comics or do something to make money, because I want to read the new issues. I don't want to miss Spider-Man 300 and everything else coming out at the time. So I put an ad in a local paper called The Recycler. And The Recycler was essentially Craigslist for that time, And you were allowed to do 2 free ads. So I would put in, X-Men, 50% off. Amazing Spider-Man, 50% off. And people would come to my parents' garage, and I would have, at this point, 10 or 12 long boxes of comics, and I would sell them for 50% off guide,
Nice.
And then I would use that money to buy new books so I can continue to read. And I would use it to buy drumsticks or whatever else I needed at that time. And this continued to happen. And I had other jobs, that I hated. But
tell me about a job you hated?
I hated all of them.
What was the first, like the one that sticks out in your mind that, oh God, I never want to do that again?
Awful. I'll tell you a number of them. I worked at Robinson's May. It was okay because I would have to take out, like mattresses and attach them to people's cars and, like with rope and stuff. And I worked at the outlet center. So, it was a bunch of people buying junk basically. And,
Gotcha.
and I would get tips sometimes. So that was kind of neat. That was probably the best of the jobs at that time. I worked at Costco. That sucked. I worked at Pepsi. I think they were trying to kill me.
And how? Making you drink Pepsi?
No, not just that. They would have me start at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the summertime, and I would work till 6 p.m.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and I was a merchandiser. What I would do is I would go from store to store and build, like when they have a bunch of Pepsi cases made to look like a chair or something. I was the guy that built those. I would stock the shelves in the different grocery stores, one to another. And it was a grueling job and took a lot of time. But, I had such a wealth of friends and people that cared about me. And I had a route. It didn't matter if the route was done in 1 hour or 12 hours, So when I was really, really in bad shape and my friends wanted me to continue hanging out at 9 o'clock when I would have to go to bed, I'd be like, well, I got to go to bed. And they'd go, well, we'll come help you. We'll do the route with you. So it'd be 3-4 of my friends. Pepsi got a pretty damn good deal. 3-4 of my friends. And, we would wake up at 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. We would hammer it out, and we'd be done in like 3.5 hours instead of like 14 hours because there was 3 or 4 of us doing it, right? And think about this. Like, these are people not getting paid. I couldn't afford to pay them. But we had such a brotherhood that they just wanted to, for me to be able to go to the beach with them the next day. Nice. And they knew that I couldn't do that if I was working.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what we have in the comic book world, Vinny, to a large extent. Like, we're competitors technically, but you wouldn't know it.
There's a certain, I think, level of camaraderie, friendship, brotherhood, friendship, and and we compete. So, but it's done professionally.
It's a fun competition, and we look out for each other's backs, and we make sure people aren't stealing from each other. I'm talking about like people ripping us off. And we protect each other, and there's a camaraderie and a brotherhood that exists that I didn't think was possible outside of, my small circle of friends, but you're from New York. I'm from, the West Coast, Vegas now, back then California. And, we've become very, very close friends. I'd say as close a friendship as you could have. And it started from you trying to get a better deal from me for some.
And you overgrading books and trying to get me to pay double.
I was the king of that. I wouldn't grade books.
You were great.
I wouldn't grade books back then. I didn't know how to grade books. I would just put a price and let you figure out.
So let's fast forward a little bit. Like, where does it? You're collecting. You're building this kind of business. I could totally relate to you in terms of what you were doing as a kid with comic books, because I started off when I was 15, and I would basically buy and sell through the Comic Buyer's Guide and then conventions in Manhattan, where I'd go and set up a table, and then a dealer would come by and say, "I'll buy out your booth," and I'd look at my friend and we'd go, "Okay, let's sell it out." And then I did it all through high school, college, and when I went in college, I had my apartment, and I had like 30 boxes behind the couch, and I'd go on Sundays to conventions in Rockville Center and in Manhattan to the Great Eastern Convention. And then when I graduated from St. John's University, I was actually selling comic books on the streets of Manhattan. I used to set up on Broadway between John and Maiden from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. I'd drive my car in with a buddy of mine, set up, I'd sell whatever I could. My best day I did was 700 cash there. That was pretty awesome for me.
That's a lot.
Drive back to Rockaway, park my car, put my inventory away, get my shorts on, go up to the beach and play volleyball with my friends till 8:30 at night as the sun was coming down in the summertime. And that was my first summer out of college. And I remember making a decision. I said, geez, I can follow like a marketing career that I went to college for marketing, or I could pursue comic books. And it was like, put on a suit, take a train to Manhattan, an hour and 15 minutes each way, make crap money, or work out of my apartment in my boxers on the phone, making deals, doing conventions, and have control of my destiny. and make probably double. And I set out that first year, I want to make this, and I hit that. And so it was tough, but by the way,
it's still using your marketing degree,
absolutely,
because you have to do that, and you do that very well.
So thanks.
It's so funny that you mentioned like the 30 boxes sitting in your. I mean, I think every comic dealer at some point or another, their furniture was comic boxes. Like my end tables and table in my little living room area were comic boxes with glass on top of them.
I've even slept on comic books. I remember one time I had to drive from Staten Island in the middle of the winter, freezing cold, bought out a store. I had the truck rental. I couldn't afford to keep it for like 3 days. I sold the entire contents of the truck to a friend of mine, but he couldn't help me. I had a buddy of mine helping me with the truck. He had to work his shift at UPS. He finished his shift and we drove from his place to the buyer's house at like 1 a.m, unloaded the truck, got the money. I think I made $2,000. And I remember getting home exhausted and looking at this $2,000 and going, oh my God, was it worth it? I think so. I'm going to sleep. And I just collapsed on the bed. And the next morning I woke up and I felt like a sense of accomplishment that I did this deal and I made some money.
That's such a massive amount of money when you think about like those days.
Oh yeah,
and, trying to make any money. I'm telling you, man, I lost money in the beginning going to conventions. I made money in the garage, but going to conventions, for some reason, I was going with my friend to a card convention. I don't know if you tried selling anything to card guys. Not fun. But I'd make no money. It cost like $35 for the table. We would split the table. And nobody cared about comics. I'm like, what am I doing here? And I remember my dad telling me, what are you doing? You're better off taking those comics and putting it in the garbage. Why are you wasting your time? And I go, Dad, there's a way to make money at this. I got to figure it out. It wasn't so much the making money part. It was the challenge. If someone else can do it, I can do it. Why can't
exactly.
I? And finally, I've had a couple of these moments in my life where I could have just laid down and died, right? In the particular field I was in. And I always persevered through it, which is why I think the primary reason why I've been successful in my life is because when the darkest moments happen is when I'm the most resilient, similar to you, Vinny. I think we're very similar. You're East Coast, I'm West Coast. That's the only difference. And you're Paisan and I'm an I was driving to this card convention again. I get suckered into going to these card conventions, and I got a ticket for $130.
Yeah, it's a big deal back then.
And I didn't have 130 cents. I wasn't sure I was going to pay for the booth that day, and I got to the thing, and I made $0. By the way, at the convention, I went home. And I sat there and I was like, shit, why am I doing this? And then I found out about a comic book convention. Right?
Oh, that could be different.
Yeah. And I was like, I'm going to try one more time. And I remember it was in Orange County, which was an hour and 15-minute drive. And, we talked about this last time, but I had the wire racks from Home Depot that I would have to buy and return every time I went to a convention because I couldn't afford to keep them. They were $5 a piece. And these are what I built my displays out of back then. And I remember I put these, 8 wire racks on my $800 Chevy Beretta, 91 Chevy Beretta that I had. And, I put my 20 boxes in the car and I drove to this convention and it started raining. And I almost veered off the road because I had a piece of shit car. And then the sun came out and shone down. And I felt like it shone down on me,
Wow. I mean, nice. It's a moment.
I got to the convention and I made $250 that day.
Nice.
And I went home and I gave the $250 to my dad because he had, anytime he saw that I needed money, he gave it to me. I never had to ask, And I don't think I would have anyway because I had a lot of pride. And I said, here, Dad, this is for you. And he goes, you made this selling comics? I go, I made it selling comics. And that was it. From then on, I started doing the right conventions, going to the right places. And I started to hone my craft. And kind of similarly in music, It's almost the same story because, I was like 23 years old, didn't have a pot to piss in. Drumming is very expensive if you're not getting everything for free. Like sticks are expensive, cymbals are expensive, and I broke everything because I hit very hard. And I was sitting in front of my friend's father's lunch truck because he would give us free food. And I had, I think, $4 in my pocket as a 23-year-old. I had a girlfriend. She was starting to talk about marriage. I was like, how the fuck am I going to afford anything? I keep getting fired from jobs. I'm making some money, but not like insane money. And I was like, I can't keep doing this. I got to go get a job and actually keep it. I had no education, no formal education whatsoever. And my prospects.
You didn't go to university, or did you go to high school? You finished
No, I barely finished high school. Vinny, I spent my time playing drums.
Gotcha.
I spent 4 or 5 hours mastering that. And that was my college.
Every day.
Every day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And listening to music and absorbing it and trying to save up a couple of bucks so I can go to a concert, from the nosebleeds. And it's like all of these things are a part of your learning process. You're watching them play live and learning something from that. And then you're listening to the recordings and there's nuances that you're picking up that a non-musician won't pick up. Then you're practicing until your hands are bleeding and getting in bands that suck, playing shows where it's a couple of people watching you. And these are all things that are a part of your tutelage, and that's what it took. Like I had to be in all these bands to get good enough to the point where when I was in a situation where the guys from System saw me, they're like, we got to have that guy in our band.
Right.
Like it had to get to that point. And it was all the sacrifices I made getting there.
System didn't have a major label deal yet, or did they?
No, they did not. But at this point, and it's the story of System is out there, so people can. I've said that many times in interviews. I don't want to tread on the same ground again, but they were selling out venues like the Roxy and Whiskey, which were 300 to 500 people, as an unsigned band, and this hadn't happened since the Guns N' Roses days.
Wow.
I mean, they were selling tickets on Ticketmaster. That was unheard of for an unsigned band, And when I joined, it got catapulted very quickly. And it got even bigger. And within 6 months, we were signed.
Yeah. And it's funny. I've talked to friends of mine who are musicians about your band, and to a man, and these are guys who have played in rock and roll bands 20, 30 years. Not the same level that you have achieved, but every one of them said that the guys from System in each of their instruments are like the best in the world. One of the best drummers in the world, one of the best bass players in the world, one of the best guitarists, So like there was something there that you guys really came together and created something incredibly special. I often likened, when people ask me, like, what System of a Down sound like, I would say to them, imagine if Metallica had the social message of Rage Against the Machine with somebody like a Freddie Mercury singing. That's how I used to describe it to people. And then they'd listen to it and go, oh yeah, okay. But I mean, that was the best I could come up with at the time. Yeah. But it was so unique. It was such a strange and unique style and interesting way of singing for Darren and Serge, and hearing the drums and the bass lines. And man, it was really special for me. I've loved rock and roll music my entire life. I grew up on bands like Led Zeppelin and, well, for me, Kiss and tons of real hard rock bands. And then when you hear something like System of a Down, to me, it was just incredibly unique and special. And man, it's been fun to be able to experience the music. And when I'm in the gym and I need something to pump me up, I'll put on some System and I get to it. It's great.
Nice. Well, then I expect that our royalty stream will go up because of that. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you said that our musicianship. I don't even think I don't really consider us to be that exceptional. When you're talking about just technique wise, it just wasn't our focus. I think System's real strength is that we have such a wealth of influences. Like every member has some things in common as far as what music influenced us, but then we have like a bunch of stuff that we introduced to each other, and that was also something that came out in our songwriting. So that's why System has number one is so different than anything else that you've heard, and it isn't the easiest thing to describe to people, and it's an amalgam of all these different styles, and I think that's part of the reason why number one in the beginning, labels were like, well, what the fuck are we supposed to do with this?
Right.
Like, it really wasn't until Rick Rubin came into the picture that every label gave us their offers. Like, as soon as Rick Rubin came, he saw us one time. He's like, I got to sign you. I got to have you. And that was it, right? Like, after that, all of a sudden, Universal had a deal for us. I mean, every major player wanted us, and they were all courting us. And but then we made our album, and it's kind of like, you'll pursue the girl until you get laid, and then maybe you will, maybe you won't continue to pursue her, right? Mm-hmm. But if you find a girl who is incredibly attractive to you, has the personality, is a good person, a kind person, and has all the personality traits that you're looking for, then you marry him, right? And that's kind of like what happens in music. Is that you get signed, everybody wants you, and then they're on to what everybody wants next, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how can I get the next System of a Down? And then you have to make your album that you've spent 10 years working on, right? All these songs. And if that album's successful, then you have to go in within 2 years and make your second album. And that's an incredible amount of pressure, because we didn't have 10 years to sit there and write the second album. But what we did have is incredibly prolific songwriters, a lyricist that is one of the best that's ever existed. I approach drums in a very different way. Again, it's not about my technique. It's more about the way that I approach a song, and the way that I create drum beats that are reminiscent of what I've done in the past, but still different enough, and that exploit all the different emotions that are possible in that song. Drums can be something that can lead you down those paths, and you may not know it, like subtle changes in Chop Suey, where I go to, and the choruses, I go to like a halftime, halfway through the chorus, right? So you listen to the chorus and then it changes, but the guitars and the vocals aren't changing. It's the drums that have changed. And, it hits your subconscious. You're not really aware of it because that's not what you're looking for. And that's what I bring to the table for System. And I think that's what's helped to differentiate us from our contemporaries and our peers, and has put us on our own. Oh, that's New York.
Yeah, we're in the city. Yeah,
it's put us in our own genre in a certain way, like. Mm-hmm. And again, it's like, dude, I've been able to do everything I wanted in my life, and we talked about this before, Vinny. Not only was I successful in music, and by the way, I don't equate success with money. I don't make any money from Torpedo. In fact, it costs me money. My comic book company.
The comic book company, yeah.
You're a much better businessman than I am. You make money. I look at it as an artistic endeavor, so making money at it isn't important. I just want to do something exceptional. But it's led me to another dream of mine, which is to write, which is a place that you also were able to achieve. You're an artist too. Yeah. And we both put out comic books that have it's a hassle and a pain in the ass to do it. This as well as I do. But wow, when you're holding your comic book and you harken back to the days when you were selling comics on the street or when you first discovered comics, or a relative introduced you, however you came to it, and you fell in love with it, and now you're a part of it, not just selling
Yes.
it, creating it. It's pretty
Yeah.
incredible.
So when for me, so just to give everybody some background, John is talking about his comic book Essentia, which is a really, really complex thriller of a story. And I was inspired. I started working on my comic book when I was in my mid-20s, but put it to bed, mid-20s, and put it to bed in 1997 and didn't touch it for until the pandemic. And I had a conversation with John where he was telling me he was doing his comic book. And then that night I said to myself, if I die tomorrow, because in the pandemic during the lockdown, I was terrified being in Manhattan, that you touch the wrong thing, you're going to die the next day. So I said to myself, if I died tomorrow, what would I regret not doing? And the first thing that popped into my mind was making my comic book. The next morning, I called up my partner, David Quinn, and I told him I wanted to get back to work on it. And we started working on The Addiction. We premiered it at New York Comic Con in October of 2023. And we had a 40-foot line around the corner. People asking me to sign a comic book was just surreal.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, and seeing my name on a comic book was a childhood dream come true. Because when I was a kid, my friends and I would fold up paper, staple it together, and we'd sit and try to draw comic books. And so this was like a huge thing for me. And I was just doing an interview the other night about it, and people asked me what was the experience like at New York Comic Con, and I said it was beyond my wildest dreams. 2 weeks before the convention, I was sitting there saying, am I going to sell any comics? Will people want my comic book? And it was, again, just tremendous. And so, John, you inspired me to take that next step forward, along with imminent death. It's funny how something terrible.
Hopefully we can inspire somebody else that's listening to this interview, Vinny.
Exactly.
You only get one life, and it's fleeting and it's short. It goes by a lot faster than you think. And if you have something that you want to do, if you have a dream, whatever that dream is, you should pursue it to the best of your ability. And failing at it isn't a failure. It's, not everybody achieves success at the same level. I'm never going to be able to dunk a basketball. I'd like to be able to. I'm never going to be able to play football, but I did play football to the best of my ability.
Yeah.
It's just that my purpose was to do something else. And, there's so many things that you can do in life, and whatever your passion is, at least explore that passion on a hobby level. Everybody's got to make a living, pay for their, make sure their families are okay, do all these things. But don't forget that your soul dies when you give up your dreams, and then you're living an existence, not a life.
Yeah. And I would say one of the key factors for me was growing up with parents who were immigrants to the United States, and making something out of nothing, and watching my parents do that, gave me the realization that I could do that as well. If my father, who barely spoke English, could start a restaurant business and own buildings and have a life, what excuse do I have? I can do this. And my mother, I will never forget, my mother always told me, it's like, anything you want to do in your life, you can do it. You just have to work hard at it. And I would take it one step further and saying, my father would also always say, knowledge is power. And you take that and say, then the next step is action is power. Putting your knowledge, putting your passion into play, and finding role models, mentors to model yourself after is also really important. I'm speaking of that. I'm curious, for you in music, were there any drummers that inspired you? And I'm sure your dad did as a musician, but and you were influenced a bit by jazz, no?
There were tons. I looked at. I was fortunate in that I had my dad's records, and they were mostly jazz. So like everything from Chicago to Maynard Ferguson to Stan Getz. And then I had a cousin, my cousin John. Actually, I think you met him before.
Yeah.
He introduced me to Rush, Sabbath, Led Zeppelin. Wow. And then I had a group of friends, and that group of friends introduced me to completely different rap. They introduced me to ska. They introduced me to older bands like The Who, The Kinks, The Stones. So I listened to every kind of music that you could imagine, as well as Armenian folk music, which we had at home. So I was very fortunate, and then my palate was full of different flavors. And talking about, again, think about the sacrifices our families made to get us to this fantastic country that we live in.
We're very blessed.
Very
blessed.
And my dad actually was in Lebanon. He was invited full scholarship to Berklee School of Music.
Wow.
Which is one of the best music schools in the world. And he actually didn't do it so he can get married and had a kid. And if you think about it, it kind of went full circle because his child, his prodigy, right, his offspring, was able to succeed on the highest level of music.
That's pretty cool, man. That's
and great. It was because of his sacrifice that I was able to do that.
And you and I were very fortunate to have great parents.
Great parents, great families. And again, like we're kindred in that way. We're not different at all. I think we're almost the same person in a lot of ways.
And it's funny, like when I met your dad, I mean, we hit it off famously, like from the get-go, and to the point where I'll text your dad every once in a while and we'll have a conversation.
He loves it when you text him. He loves you,
Yeah. He's a sweet guy. Sweet guy.
Vinny, I'm sorry. I don't want to cut it short. I'm having a great time with this conversation, and I'd like to do it again. We got to take our little baby to the doctor.
Okay. Listen, this has been wonderful. I can't thank you enough. Maybe we'll do a part 2 sometime soon.
Sure. And we have lots more to talk about. We got to talk about like the adventures we've had when you come to see us play in the different places, and how much we make fun of our friends. Like there's a lot of this one has been a lot more serious. I think the next one we should just show how much fun we have together. And
fantastic. And sounds great to me. Sounds great to me. Thank you, John, so much for making time. I know you're not only busy with your kids, running Torpedo, writing Essentia, getting ready, hopefully, to tour again soon with System of a Down. Thanks so much. That'd be great. I can't wait. Maybe I'm going to fly out to one or two of them.
You should.
Let's put it on the calendar. Okay. Thank you so much, and we will talk again real soon. And be well, my friend.
My brother.
All right. Peace.